But I do see some influencers who, almost make it seem as though it is all roses and it is all daffodils. To quote, past guests that I've spoken to, and we know that that's not the case. Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety from within the BIPOC community. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. Thanks for joining me today. Got a little bit of a different episode planned for you. Some of it is going to be off the cuff, but all of it is going to be solo. And for those who follow the show and who listen to the show, you probably recognize that I don't have a guest here with me today, and that's intentional. We it's interesting because we are approaching 50 episodes here at Stacking Days, and I've been very intentional in not doing a whole lot of solo episodes, and just in full transparency and vulnerability, one of the reasons why I don't do more episodes solo is because I find it very convenient to be able to hide behind the interview and be the interviewer and have a guest on where I can ask a lot of questions, but I don't have to do a lot of talking. So I've had the fortune over the last several months of being on some other podcasts, and I think that it is very therapeutic to be able to speak your opinions, your thoughts, your experiences out loud. And I've also been nudged by a handful of folks who are closer in my circle, both who are directly related and work on the podcast, and then also in my personal sphere to do more solo episodes. So I wanted to take this opportunity as we kind of move towards the end of season 2 to do some more solo episodes and speak directly to the listeners, and also at the same time continue to push my own boundaries around comfort and what has honestly been a great project, but this aspect of it is somewhat of a hard thing for me to do. So be gentle, and hopefully you guys can enjoy. So there's a few different things that I want to cover today. It'll be somewhat loose, so I'll act as though that someone is literally sitting there across from me, listening. But for those who are on sobriety journeys, everyone has their own toolkit, right? Part of what my toolkit is really staying abreast and as far as what's going on in the broader space. And part of that is I have a news feed where I create alerts for recovery and sobriety and alcoholism and non-alcoholic beverages, and there's a pretty elaborate list. So once a day, when I'm kind of scrolling through my phone, I tend to go into these very curated news feeds and just read about the current events of what's happening in the broader space of sobriety. It's almost a way for me to kind of tap into the larger narrative around kind of where the space is culturally speaking in our country right now, and in some respects globally. I think that alcohol and abstaining from recovery and sobriety is something that we're starting to see much more prevalently on a global scale. So a few things that has stood out to me this past week is one, and say what you will about celebrity and celebrities talking about their journeys, but what I've found in my time is that very seldom do you find celebrities of color talk about their journeys in sobriety and talk about kind of what their path has been. And so recently I stumbled upon a series of articles that was highlighting Tiffany Haddish. And I'm going to assume most of the folks who listen to this show know who Tiffany Haddish is. She's an extremely famous comedian, very funny woman. But at the same time, she has clearly had a very challenged life leading up into her celebrity, her stardom. And as of late, over the last couple of years, there have been um, some very public developments in her life that come by way of her drinking. So the short of it is she's just recently, late last year, 2023, came out of her second DUI. She has her own story that she speaks to as it relates to how she came into her second DUI, but within that, she has a court mandated sobriety, and recently she was on this podcast. I think it's the conversation with Amanda de Cadent, and hopefully I'm pronouncing her name right, who also happens to be in long term sobriety and is a huge proponent of recovery. But they're getting into all of these things, Tiffany Haddish and Amanda. In this conversation around Tiffany's experience, not just in sobriety, but the traumas that she had went through in childhood, her experience within the foster system, her experience as a woman and a woman of color. And I thought it was an extremely important episode to listen to because, like I said, again, you don't really hear a lot of folks of color, specifically black people, talking celebrities, that is, talking about some of these darker aspects. So I applaud her for coming on to that show and just being very, very open and honest. But one of the taglines that was and this is obviously clickbait, but one of the taglines of, I think it was an Us Weekly article that came up in my newsfeed, was Tiffany saying that it's not that hard, and that automatically grabbed my attention because I'm saying to myself, I know she's going to be talking about sobriety. I am curious within that, what is she going to be what is she alluding to when she's saying that it's not that hard? So I think that the context was somewhat skewed out, and they captured this one snippet, but it certainly stood out. And I think that if you get an opportunity to go in and listen to this episode, and I'll see if I can link it in the show notes, you'll find that there really isn't much about Tiffany's life that hasn't been challenging and hard, and perhaps because of that, in relatively speaking, her moving into sobriety because it was court mandated and because alcohol, quote unquote, wasn't necessarily her thing. It hasn't been that challenging to abstain. But what she really does start getting into is now she, 72 days in to her sobriety at the time of this podcast, that that she's now having to really get into a lot of the why behind what she drank, and also talks about a lot about the benefits that she's experienced in not drinking. And in true form of a comedian, she makes some pretty great jokes, but I think at the end of the day, without taking full ownership of an addiction, which I don't think is unique to Tiffany, because I think a lot of folks, including myself, have had a hard time adopting, the descriptor of being an addict. She certainly has recognized the benefits of sobriety, and again, I think it's just important for us to recognize all people of color, whether they are celebrities, not celebrities, working class, whatever it may be, who have chosen this life for themselves. Because I do think that the more examples that we have out there of people who are on this road, which is challenging, the better it is for all of us. So I wanted to highlight that just because it's always good for me personally to see folks who seemingly have so much to lose in the public sphere being very open and honest about their own experiences, not just in their lives. And Tiffany has had a very traumatic life, and I don't know about her celebrity, but certainly leading up to her celebrity, a traumatic life. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. So I wanted to shout her out for doing that, and I wish her the best on her journey. But the reason that I wanted to talk about that is because it then, my segue is speaking about the broader ecosystem of influencers, of recovery, of sobriety, and and how it can oftentimes be this like polar opposite of actual experience versus what folks are promoting their experience of sobriety being on the internet and on social platforms. I've personally I tap into Instagram, I tap into TikTok, a lot of these social platforms as a proxy community for myself when it comes to finding solace in the decisions that I've made and seeing other people do fantastic things. But I do see some influencers who, almost make it seem as though it is all roses and it is all daffodils. To quote, past guests that I've spoken to, and we know that that's not the case. And the reason why I bring it up is because I was reading this other article on the Guardian, and this literally came all the way from Australia, and it was written by a woman by the name of Ashley Davenport, and she just happens to be a white woman, but she's sober 3 months at the time of writing this article. And this is the title. It's "I stopped drinking 3 months ago. It's not as simple as the internet makes it look. Uh, Influencer sobriety is a world where alcohol addiction is history, but it's all too neat." And I'll link this as well in the show notes. But I think that we all have to be, number one, non-judgmental, right? Like, I think that the space of sobriety and recovery is a space that we want to make sure that is safe for all who want to enter in, regardless of whether or not, you're, a person of color, you're, black, white, brown, whatever the case may be. I think you want a space that's safe for people to walk into. But also, I think it's important to paint a picture and create a narrative of honesty and pragmatism when it comes to sobriety and recovery. And more oftentimes than not, it is actually more challenging than not. And I am now approaching 3 years sobriety myself, and I come into circumstance, experience every day in my life that is extremely challenging. Realities of life as an adult with responsibilities that, in my past, when I was drinking, it was really easy for me to be able to numb myself of those things, right? I would drink a couple bottles of wine and everything was cool. So yes, there are a lot of beautiful things that come with sobriety. All of the health benefits that we see swirling around, all of the mental benefits that we see swirling around. But at the same time, for those who suffered from some degree of addiction and substance use disorder, there are aspects of recovery and sobriety that are extremely challenging, that are extremely uncomfortable, that one has never really had to face head on and look in the mirror at in a long time. So I just want to level set for those who are out there who are looking at this very skewed version of what sobriety and recovery can look like, both across the community, across all culture. Um, it is probably the best decision that you will ever make for yourself, but it is not going to be a cakewalk. You will have your fantastic days where you hear the birds sing louder and the lights are brighter and the sounds of music are that much sweeter, but then you're also going to have those times where you're extremely challenged. And I think that that's where your toolkit, that's where your support system, that's where your community that you found, that's where a lot of the work that you're giving back into the community is going to play to your benefit, to keep you on that path of betterment. So I wanted to just call that out because this article resonated, and I was like, you know what, I can absolutely see where Ashley is coming from, especially being in early sobriety and just calling a spade for what it is in being a spade and saying, you know what, uh, it ain't that neat. So we shouldn't set the expectation that it is. And what I've tried to do, and what I applaud the guests who've come on this show in doing, is just telling a uncensored, very truthful account of their own stories as it relates, not just when it comes to their addiction, but also as it relates to their recovery. Because I think that life is messy, but I also think that there's a lot of beauty to be attained in that messiness. So don't take what all of what you see on social for being the whole truth and nothing but the truth, because I think that sobriety and recovery, again, is dynamic, and it's also intentional, right? So you got to take the good with the bad. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description or find it on stackanddays.com. That's stacknday's.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation. Okay, so the last point that I wanted to chat a little bit about is something that I've certainly felt on my own in my own journey, and I don't know, and I'd be curious to hear what the community says about this. Is this concept around sobriety fatigue, right? I feel as though that there is oftentimes, at least for me, there was a honeymoon, right? You in early sobriety, you're really trying to stack those days and maintain a degree of clarity as you get to a place where you're better equipped to do some of this, higher level emotional, spiritual work. And it's exciting, and at the same time as being extremely scary. But over time, you get through your first 30, 60, 90 days, a year, 2 years, and you're so deeply embedded in the sober recovery community, and you're talking about it so much. I could see how folks can get a little fatigued with the subject matter, and get to a place where the line might be, you know, sobriety and recovery. Yes, this is a cornerstone to who I am, but it isn't all of who I am and what I am. And, and I'm much more dynamic of an individual when it comes to how I experience the world. So I was on social media, and a gentleman that I follow had mentioned this in a feed, and I hadn't seen it before. And I'm sure that it is a thing, but I hadn't seen someone explicitly call it out and say, you know what, I need to take a pause here, because I'm experiencing this window of fatigue when it comes to not only my own sobriety, but also experiencing sobriety, there was sobriety and recovery journeys of other people. And I can definitely empathize with that. I will say, for me personally, I do this podcast. I speak about sobriety with other folks who are in it as well, because it's an accountability tool for me to stay on my own journey. It keeps it front and center of my mind, because the truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, as much fatigue as you may feel in this space, that fatigue is exponentially more beneficial to you than taking your eye off the ball and potentially finding yourself in a position where you're kind of sliding back into habits that at one point in time certainly didn't serve you, i.e., potentially even drinking again. So I try to keep very much in the space of sobriety. I still listen to, podcasts on a weekly basis. There are 3 or 4 of them that, specifically focused on sobriety that I keep in my personal rotation, that I'm checking out on a regular basis. I'm constantly reading about it. I'm constantly talking to people about it, because I think that there is growth that can be had in fatigue. Like, if you think about, for those who are out there, who are very much into fitness, right, and strengthening one's muscles, there is growth to be had after, putting your body through a degree of stress to a point of fatigue. And I believe that the same is true for emotional development. The same is true for personal development, that it's okay to fatigue yourself some, so long as that you can find spaces of rest, right? So long as you can find spaces of recovery, emotional recovery, mental health recovery, to be able to come back and stay on the mat and stick into it. I think that really putting that pressure on your intention is a healthy thing. So, I bring these 3 points up and obviously they're kind of like in different spaces on the spectrum, but I bring these 3 points up because, as you are on your journey, as I've been on my journey, things have resonated for me differently at different times. When I was in early sobriety, I had to be laser focused and extremely prescriptive about how I was going to go about my recovery. What was I going to do to not drink? What was I going to support that decision in not drinking? What was I going to be, replacing my time with in those times where I otherwise. So it was very prescriptive and intentional, right? Identifying like why was it that I drank. There were some very specific things that I needed to figure out for myself and implement. And as time has gone on, and as this has become more of just my day-to-day lifestyle, it's opened up my perspective on what recovery, what sobriety, and what ultimately development and well-being can look like for me. Which is why I oftentimes find tools in unlikely places. You'd think that a news feed isn't necessarily where one is going to primarily go to in order to find tools to continue to keep themselves accountable along the decisions that they've made. But I think things pop up all the time in the broader culture that remind me, at least, in the decision that I've made for myself and keep me now. So at the end of the day, these are all things that cause me to think not just about sobriety, but also cause me to think about the experience of life, how my experience of life, how it is similar in a lot of ways to how others are experiencing life. Whether you're a celebrity, if you're a writer in Australia, if you're an average everyday person, who's just voicing an opinion in a still Instagram post. And I think that at the end of the day, what is for me is a form of connection, right? And yes, I have my own community and people that I talk to, but I also think that we have a shared experience, on this planet. It just so happens that some of the shared experience that I seek out happens to revolve around sobriety and recovery. So I hope you guys, this is a shorter episode, so I'm not going to keep you here for 45 minutes to an hour like we usually do, but I wanted to come in here, chime in, and give you a little bit of like the inner workings of like what happens in my mind when I'm thinking about my own journey, and also give you a sense of that you can be agnostic when it comes to your program. You don't necessarily have to subscribe to any one thing because there are many things that can work for you. But what I would suggest, once you've kind of gotten through those initial stages of your own journey, is be open to finding things that ultimately work for you and support you in the decisions that you are making for yourself. Generally, broadly, like holistically speaking, but also the decisions that you're making for yourself on a daily basis. So I appreciate y'all tuning in today. Feedback is, I believe, a gift. So, feel free to drop me a line. You can email me at rdg@stackingdays.com. You can also hit me up on IG, on Instagram, that is at stackingdays. Would love to hear what you have to say. And again, we're coming up on the end of season 2. So I'll do another episode in a few here talking specifically about this project. But excited about the fact that we've been able to create community together for people of color who otherwise really haven't had many platforms to be able to openly and safely share their stories, with our within our people and our culture. So I'm really proud of what we've been able to do. I want to be able to come on and speak more directly to folks. And I also want people to speak more directly to me. Even if I haven't been in an opportunity and fortunate enough to interview you, I still want to be able to create that dialogue and ensure that the conversation is being had not just on the podcast platforms in long format, but we're having, these conversations. And when I say we, I mean myself and, the broader community on other platforms. So appreciate y'all sticking around. I'll see y'all next week we have another great episode of Stacking Days coming out. And until then, please be well, one day at a time. Peace. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices in healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.